You see what just happened here?
What?
She treated me to the Arabian mocha java.
And you misinterpret this how?
Seinfeld is a classic sitcom that has kept us laughing for decades, but even the best shows aren't immune to a few sneaky slip-ups. Believe it or not, some hilarious bloopers slipped past the eagle eyes of the crew and fans alike, hidden in plain sight. These tiny goofs didn't ruin the show's magic, but spotting them now adds a fresh layer of fun. Let's dive into some of the cutest Seinfeld bloopers that flew under the radar until recently. Get ready to see your favorite show in a whole new light. Jerry's ever-changing apartment number. If you're a true Seinfeld fan, you've probably spent more time than you'd care to admit staring at the hallway outside Jerry's apartment. And if you were really paying attention during those early seasons, you may have noticed something a bit off. The number on Jerry's door is 411. That's right, not 3A like most fans remember, but 411. It's one of those little continuity quirks that slips by most viewers unless they're rewatching the series with the eyes of a detective. There's no grand explanation, no moving day montage, not even a throwaway joke about switching floors. One day, it's 411, and not long after, it's magically 3A, like the universe of Seinfeld just shrugged and hoped no one would notice. This quiet change has sparked speculation among fans for years. Did Jerry move to a different apartment in the same building and forget to tell anyone? Unlikely, given the familiar setup remains exactly the same. More plausibly, the switch is just one of those early series inconsistencies that got cleaned up as the show found its rhythm. In the world of television production, sets and details often evolve, especially during the first season when creators are still refining the look and feel of the show. The door number change from 411 to 3A may not have been intentional or meaningful, but for eagle-eyed fans, it's one of those bloopers that adds to the charm of Seinfeld's quirky, observational universe. The disappearing bathroom. For a show famously about nothing, Seinfeld had a surprising number of set design inconsistencies, none more puzzling than the mystery of Jerry's bathroom. In some episodes, it's clearly visible at the end of a short hallway to the left of Jerry's kitchen, giving the apartment a logical, lived-in feel. But in others, that same hallway morphs dramatically. Sometimes it leads to a different kind of room, sometimes it's blocked entirely, and occasionally it just disappears. The confusion leaves viewers wondering if Jerry's apartment is secretly part of a magical realm, one where architectural logic bends to the needs of the script. While such inconsistencies are common in sitcoms due to the demands of filming and set changes, Seinfeld fans have long pointed out how jarring it can be, especially in a show that spent so much time in one apartment. The fluctuating layout, particularly the phantom bathroom, became almost a running joke among detail-oriented viewers. Kramers' apartment door problem. Kramers' apartment door is a puzzling piece of television architecture that defies spatial logic and continuity. While Jerry's apartment remains relatively consistent throughout Seinfeld, the layout surrounding Kramers' place seems to exist in a constant state of flux. In some episodes, his door opens directly into a hallway that suggests a certain orientation, often conflicting with what we see when characters move between his and Jerry's apartments. Other times, the hallway seems longer, shorter, or entirely reconfigured, leaving viewers scratching their heads. It's as if the building itself is part of the joke, a surreal, shifting space that bends to the comedic rhythm of the show, rather than adhering to real-world physics. This ever-changing geography may actually explain some of Kramers' famously erratic behavior. One moment he's sliding into Jerry's kitchen like a man on a mission. The next, he's mysteriously emerging from a door that logically shouldn't exist. The inconsistency of his own front door, where it leads, how far it is from Jerry's, or even what lies on the other side, mirrors Kramers' unpredictable personality. Perhaps he's not just eccentric, but a victim of unstable spatial reality. In the end, the fluctuating layout adds to the show's absurd vibe, making Kramers' world feel just a little more off-kilter and a lot more entertaining. The kitchen wall, again, missing. There's definitely something suspicious going on in Jerry's kitchen, and no, it's not just the alarming amount of cereal boxes stacked up on the shelves. In the early seasons of Seinfeld, the wall that's supposed to separate the kitchen from the living room is almost non-existent. Instead of a defined barrier, the kitchen opens up into the living space with an unusually wide, almost transparent feel. This gives Jerry's apartment a very open, airy vibe. You can see way more of the kitchen than you'd expect in a typical New York apartment, almost like the two rooms are one big space. It's a curious choice that makes the apartment feel less like a real home and more like a stage, emphasizing the show's sitcom roots. But then, as the series progresses, something changes. That barely there wall suddenly becomes a solid, well-defined structure, complete with built-in shelving and a proper division between the kitchen and living room. Did Jerry decide to do some off-screen DIY remodeling? Or did the set designers simply figure out what worked best visually and spatially as the show went on? Whatever the reason, this subtle shift in the apartment's layout is a perfect example of Seinfeld's tendency to quietly tweak details without explanation. It's like the show was saying, "We're not too concerned about strict realism. As long as the jokes land, the set can be whatever it needs to be." And it's the same thing with Costanza's own blooper, George's fake fireman memory. George is a source of his own set mistakes, as his character is often a walking contradiction wrapped in self-delusion. In one episode, George confidently claims that he's never had a job that involved fire. But anyone familiar with the show immediately remembers the glaring exception, that infamous incident during his time working for the Yankees. At a kid's birthday party, a fire broke out, and George's reaction was pure Costanza. He shoved everyone, including children and elderly guests, out of the way to make a hasty escape. That moment was definitely a fire-involved job situation, making his earlier statement not just questionable but outright false. This kind of inconsistency is classic George, though, perfectly fitting his character's pattern of exaggeration, forgetfulness, or outright dishonesty. It's also possible that the writers simply overlooked this detail, creating a continuity error in the storyline. But honestly, with George, it's hard to say which is more likely. Given how often he contradicts himself or rewrites reality to suit his own narrative, either he's lying or the showrunners just didn't connect the dots. Newman's shifting apartment location. Newman's living situation in Seinfeld is a curious blend of proximity and ambiguity. On one hand, it's well established early on that he resides in the same apartment building as Jerry, often portrayed as the quintessential next-door nemesis. This close physical closeness amplifies their rivalry, making their interactions feel immediate and personal, like two neighbors locked in a perpetual battle of wits and mischief. Several scenes reinforce this idea, Newman sneaking around hallways, popping up just down the hall to irritate Jerry, and the frequent in-building face-offs that highlight the claustrophobic comedic tension between the two characters. However, this clear-cut picture sometimes gets murky as the series progresses. There are moments when Newman appears to be traveling across town, arriving with mail, or stirring up chaos far from the confines of their building. Jerry occasionally references Newman in ways that suggest he's less an immediate neighbor and more a distant, almost spectral presence. showing up unpredictably wherever the plot calls for trouble. Elaine's inconsistent apartment number. Elaine's apartment situation in Seinfeld is a classic example of the show's playful approach to continuity, or rather, its occasional disregard for it. In one memorable episode, her apartment is labeled as 1Q, leading to the now iconic 1Q? 1Q bit, where the characters joke about how strange and confusing that apartment number is. Then, seemingly out of nowhere in a later episode, her apartment is shown as 3C. This sudden shift has sparked plenty of speculation among fans. Did Elaine move to a different floor or switch apartments without any on-screen explanation? Or was it simply a case of the writers prioritizing a funny moment over keeping every detail consistent? Given the nature of Seinfeld, a show famous for its sharp humor and often self-contained storylines, such discrepancies aren't entirely surprising. Continuity sometimes took a back seat when a good joke or plot device was on the line. Jerry's computer timeline. Ah yes, Jerry's sleek Macintosh computer, perched proudly on his desk long before Macs became household staples. Back in the early 90s, spotting that kind of cutting-edge tech in a regular apartment was a rare treat, usually reserved for true tech enthusiasts or industry insiders like Steve Jobs himself. While most people were still fumbling with bulky beige PCs or clunky CRT monitors, Jerry's Mac sat there glowing softly, almost like a window into the future. It was a symbol of sophistication and forward thinking, hinting that Jerry might be a step ahead of his time, or at least someone who appreciated the finer, more elegant designs in technology. Of course, there's also the possibility that the set designer simply thought the Macintosh looked cool and didn't sweat the details of historical accuracy. Either way, it creates a charming little time warp moment for anyone familiar with what computers actually looked like back then. It's those subtle touches, like Jerry's Mac, that add a piece of authenticity and nostalgia to the scene, reminding viewers just how far technology has come in a relatively short time. Whether intentional or not, that glowing Apple logo on the desk is a tiny nod to a world on the brink of digital revolution, frozen in a snapshot of early 90s tech culture. Time-traveling cereal boxes. If you've ever found yourself watching Seinfeld and zoning in on Jerry's kitchen shelves, don't worry, we've all done it, you might have noticed something pretty quirky. The cereal boxes seem to have a life of their own. Not literally, of course, but if you pay close attention, you'll see that the brands and arrangements shift mysteriously between scenes, sometimes even within the same episode. One moment, there's a box of Cheerios perched neatly on the shelf. The next, it's swapped out for cornflakes in the exact same spot, as if some invisible hand is rearranging Jerry's breakfast lineup when the cameras aren't rolling. It's almost as if Jerry has a phantom roommate who just can't resist tidying up his kitchen, leaving behind an inconsistent trail of breakfast cereals. While the writers and directors focused on the comedy and character-driven moments, the props team seemed less concerned about keeping Jerry's cereal collection consistent. So next time you're binge-watching the show, keep an eye on those shelves. Jerry's breakfast habits might just be the most unpredictable thing about his apartment. Job history confusion. Kramer is the king of oddball behavior, but his job history might be even more confusing than his personality. In one episode, he proudly declares that he's never held a job, not even once, which sounds exactly like something Kramer would boast about. It fits perfectly with his free-spirited, unconventional vibe, as if having a steady job would somehow cramp his unique style. But then, just when you think you've got him figured out, the show throws in scenes where Kramer is clearly working or at least attempting to work. Remember when he went on strike at H&H Bagels? Or the time he took a job dressing up as a department store Santa? only to get fired for spreading communist propaganda. These moments seem to contradict his earlier claim and add to the mystery of what Kramer actually does with his time. So, which is it? Is Kramer an eternal slacker who's never held down a real job? Or is he a part-time working man dabbling in odd gigs when the mood strikes? The truth is probably somewhere in between. Either Kramer has a selective memory that conveniently erases his brief employment stints, or the writers simply made up his job history as they went along to fit the storyline of the week. Knowing Kramer's unpredictable nature, it's likely a bit of both. His character embodies spontaneity and chaos, so a consistent resume would be the last thing he'd want. If you're a hardcore Seinfeld fan or just someone with a keen eye, you might start spotting some familiar faces lurking in the background of multiple episodes. How? For once, do not focus on the main characters. Recycled background extras. These background actors often pop up repeatedly, sometimes even within the same season, but portraying entirely different characters each time. One minute they're casually walking past Monk's Cafe, blending into the bustling New York City crowd. The next, they're seated inside, engaged in conversation as a completely different patron. This recurring use of extras is a subtle but amusing quirk of the show's production, reflecting both practical casting choices and the tight-knit nature of the Seinfeld crew. What makes this phenomenon especially entertaining is the way it adds an unintended page of humor for observant viewers. It's like these background actors have secret alter egos or parallel lives within the Seinfeld universe, slipping seamlessly from one role to another without any acknowledgement from the main characters. Over time, you might find yourself recognizing the same person as a waiter in one episode, a passerby in another, and maybe even a shopkeeper down the street. This recycling of background actors adds a little extra warmth to the show's world, creating a quirky, familiar environment that longtime fans can't help but notice and appreciate. Elaine's age anomaly. Trying to figure out Elaine's exact age feels like chasing a moving target. Throughout the series, her age seems to fluctuate depending on the episode or even the context of a single scene. Sometimes she casually drops hints about being in her early 30s, but in other moments, the timeline just doesn't add up. She might reference events or milestones that would place her in a completely different age bracket. It's almost as if the writers never bothered to keep her age consistent, instead opting for whatever fit the joke or plot best at the time. This approach leaves fans guessing and debating rather than settling on a clear answer. Because of these differences, pinning down Elaine's actual age becomes a nearly impossible task, unless you're willing to dive deep into a rabbit hole of episode transcripts, timelines, and background details, essentially turning into a conspiracy theorist with a whiteboard, colored markers, and a web of string connecting every vague age reference. Even then, you'd have to accept that the creators prioritized humor and character dynamics over strict continuity. So, Elaine's age remains one of those fun, unsolvable mysteries that adds to her personality, keeping viewers entertained and slightly bewildered at the same time. Jerry's magic bike. The bike hanging on the wall in Jerry's apartment is one of those quirky, almost supernatural set pieces that adds a subtle element of comedy and confusion to the show's environment. It never seems to stay put. One moment it's neatly displayed above the couch, and the next it's vanished entirely, only to reappear in a completely different spot without any explanation. This odd little inconsistency becomes almost a character in itself, a silent witness to the endless punchlines and awkward conversations. Its presence, or lack thereof, adds to the magic of the apartment, reminding viewers that sitcom sets often have their own unspoken logic, where continuity sometimes takes a back seat to convenience or visual humor. What makes the bike especially amusing is that Jerry never actually rides it. It's more of an enigmatic decoration than a functional vehicle. It's as if the bike exists purely to tease the audience, a prop that delights in defying expectations and breaking the rules of on-screen reality. The shrinking apartment. Absolutely, Jerry's apartment on Seinfeld is notorious for its fluctuating dimensions, almost as if it has a personality of its own. In some episodes, the space feels surprisingly open, with plenty of room to move around, giving the impression that it's a fairly roomy New York apartment. You can see how the furniture is spaced out comfortably, and the kitchen area seems to stretch out a bit. But then, in other episodes, the apartment suddenly feels cramped and cozy, with the couch pushed uncomfortably close to the kitchen counter. The layout seems to shift, with the hallway narrowing or walls moving in, making the space look much smaller than before. It's like the set designers and directors adjusted the apartment's size and shape on a whim to better fit the scene or camera angles. You could say it's a classic TV set quirk, where continuity sometimes takes a back seat to practicality or comedic timing. But it also adds a chunk of delight and mystery to the show. Since fans often joke about Jerry's apartment being a shape-shifting space that defies logic, whether it's the kitchen counter sneaking closer to the couch or the hallway magically compressing or stretching, the apartment's flexible dimensions have become an iconic, if unintentional, part of Seinfeld's legacy. Kramers' door sound effects. Kramers' entrances on Seinfeld are nothing short of iconic. He bursts into Jerry's apartment with the energy and chaos of a human hurricane, instantly shifting the scene's momentum. His sudden animated arrivals are a hallmark of the show, creating an unmistakable comedic rhythm. However, if you pay close attention, there's a little audio quirk that often goes unnoticed on a casual watch. The signature squeaky door sound that signals Kramer's arrival doesn't always line up perfectly with the moment he actually steps inside. This subtle mismatch occurs because the creaky door noise is frequently added later during post-production, rather than being captured live during filming. As a result, you might catch Kramer already halfway across the room before the door creak finally kicks in, creating a slight but noticeable disconnect between the visuals and sound. It's a tiny imperfection, but once you become aware of it, the effect is almost impossible to unhear. This off-sync squeak becomes a curious little Easter egg for fans who enjoy dissecting the show's production details. Despite this minor technical glitch, Kramer's entrances remain some of the most memorable moments on Seinfeld, proving that the character's wild energy and allure far outweigh any post-production slip-ups. George's glasses continuity. George's glasses situation is pretty inconsistent throughout the scenes. One moment he's clearly wearing them, and then suddenly they vanish without any explanation. There's no scene where he's shown taking them off or putting them back on. They just seem to appear or disappear out of nowhere. It's almost as if the glasses are teleporting on and off his face, seemingly at random, and depending solely on what the scene demands rather than any logical reason. This kind of inconsistency might be minor, but it still stands out once you notice it. It's the kind of detail that can pull you out of the story, even if just for a second. While it's not a major blooper that ruins the entire experience, it does make you pause and think, wait, when did he even take those off? Or why are the glasses back now? These little visual glitches, especially in something as simple as wearing glasses, can feel distracting because they break the continuity that helps keep viewers immersed. The Vanishing Table in Monk's Cafe. Monk's Cafe is practically the fifth main character in Seinfeld, the trusty meeting spot where Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer hash out life's absurdities over endless cups of coffee. But even this beloved diner has its mysteries, including one sneaky blooper that fans rarely catch: the case of the Vanishing Table. In some episodes, the gang's regular booth is nestled right by a certain table that clearly exists in wide shots. Yet in other scenes, that same table magically disappears, as if it was never there at all. One moment, there's a couple sipping coffee behind George, and the next, poof, it's empty space. This disappearing act isn't part of some elaborate inside joke. It's more likely a continuity flub caused by filming on different days or rearranging the set for camera angles. Still, once you notice it, it's impossible to unsee. It messes with the layout of monks in your head, turning a familiar, cozy setting into something weirdly elastic. It's a small detail, sure, but in a show as obsessively rewatched as Seinfeld, even a vanishing table feels like a big deal. Elaine's job at the J. Peterman catalog. Elaine's career at the J. Peterman catalog is a bit of a roller coaster ride, marked by constant shifts and surprising turns. She starts off as a copy editor, carefully refining the catalog's distinctive prose. But it doesn't take long before she's thrown into the spotlight, crafting dramatic and theatrical product descriptions that capture the essence of the brand's eccentric style. Her role soon evolves again, with her suddenly stepping into what seems like an executive position, though the specifics of her responsibilities are never quite clear. This fluidity in her job title reflects the show's playful disregard for strict continuity, allowing Elaine's character to adapt seamlessly to whatever the episode's plot demands. Despite the ever-changing nature of her job, Elaine remains consistently captivating and hilarious, proving that her value goes far beyond any official title. Whether she's meticulously editing copy, weaving elaborate stories about a piece of clothing, or managing mysterious executive duties, her wit and warmth never waver. In the end, Elaine's true title might just be the queen of comedic versatility, effortlessly navigating a chaotic workplace while delivering laughs every step of the way. Back to Jerry, who had many inconsistencies but still is understandable because of his fun personality. This time, it's his romance. Jerry's relationship timeline. Jerry's dating history is notoriously extensive, often serving as a running gag throughout the series. He frequently references past relationships that the audience has never seen on screen, adding mystery or confusion. These mentions pop up randomly, with Jerry casually dropping names or anecdotes about ex-girlfriends that don't quite fit into the established timeline of his love life. Sometimes, these references seem to contradict events or relationships shown in earlier episodes, making it tricky for fans to piece together a coherent dating history. It's almost as if Jerry's romantic past is a patchwork quilt, full of colorful but loosely connected fragments that don't always align neatly. This inconsistency could be chalked up to Jerry's notoriously forgetful or unreliable memory, reflecting his often scatterbrained personality. On the other hand, it's possible that the writers never intended for viewers to keep a meticulous scorecard of every girlfriend Jerry ever had. Instead, these offhand mentions function more as comedic devices or background details to support jokes and character development in the moment. The occasional timeline mismatches and unexplored relationships highlight the show's playful approach to continuity, emphasizing humor and character quirks over strict narrative consistency. Ultimately, Jerry's love life remains a fun, chaotic mess, part of his appeal and a subtle nod to the unpredictable nature of dating itself. The no-hugging, no-learning rule gets broken. Absolutely, the no-hugging, no-learning mantra was a defining feature of Seinfeld, setting it apart from the typical sitcom formula that often leans heavily into moral lessons and emotional resolutions. The show prided itself on its irreverent observational humor and the cynical, self-centered nature of its main characters. Instead of characters evolving in a traditional sense or resolving their issues with heartfelt epiphanies, they frequently doubled down on their flaws, creating humor through selfishness, awkward social situations, and often absurd scenarios. This refusal to teach or soften up its characters was a bold move that helped Seinfeld carve out its unique comedic identity and resonate with audiences who appreciated its unapologetic realism and sharp wit. That said, Seinfeld was never completely immune to moments of genuine warmth or subtle character development, even if they were fleeting and usually undercut by a punchline. Occasionally, the show would allow its characters a brief glimpse of vulnerability or growth, whether it was Jerry showing a rare moment of empathy, Elaine demonstrating unexpected kindness, or George confronting his own neuroses. These rare instances added depth to the characters and gave viewers a sense that beneath the comedy, there was a nuanced human element at play. However, true to the show's spirit, these moments were typically short-lived and quickly reverted back to the familiar self-serving patterns that kept the humor sharp and the tone distinct. In essence, Seinfeld balanced its comedic cynicism with just enough heart to keep the audience invested, without ever fully abandoning its no hugging, no learning ethos. Still loved despite its inconsistencies. Let's be real, Seinfeld is full of inconsistencies. Characters change jobs with no explanation. Apartments magically shift layouts, and even basic facts, like how many siblings someone has, seem to get rewritten from one season to the next. But here's the thing, nobody really cares. Fans still love it, obsess over it, quote it constantly, and rewatch it like it's comfort food. So why does a show riddled with continuity errors still hold up after all these years? Simple. It's not about perfect storytelling. It's about comedy. Seinfeld was never trying to be a tightly plotted drama or a carefully crafted character study. It was about small, ridiculous moments in everyday life, exaggerated just enough to be hilarious. The jokes landed. The timing was flawless, and the characters, as flawed as they were, felt weirdly relatable. Another big reason people keep coming back to Seinfeld is how timeless the social awkwardness feels. Sure, the clothes scream 90s and nobody has a smartphone, but the situations? Still painfully real. Bad dates, annoying neighbors, weird coworkers, Seinfeld turned all those little frustrations into comedy gold. Whether George is lying his way into a fake job, or Elaine is breaking up with someone over how they eat their peas, we see bits of ourselves in these absurd scenarios. And then there's the cast chemistry. You could mess up a dozen little background details, and most people wouldn't care, as long as the main four are firing on all cylinders. Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer each brought something totally unique to the table, and when they bounced off each other, it was magic. That kind of chemistry isn't something you can fake, and it's a huge part of why the show's flaws feel forgivable. In fact, they kind of make the whole thing feel more human. Did you like the show too? Share your favorite blooper in the comments section. Subscribe to the channel for more.